It's the Blue Vote Cafe, a little bit wonkish, a whole lot of fun. I'm David Schellenberg, along with Rachel Oikster, the co-chairs for Democrats Abroad here in Canada's capital region in Ottawa. Hello, Rachel.
Hello, David. How are you?
I'm fighting a bit of a cold, truthfully.
Oh, I'm sorry to hear that.
Well, you know, even in the era of COVID, every now and then a cold comes along.
Oh, yeah, it does. Although we are all still washing our hands and not breathing on each other. So
Yes.
I'm sorry that a virus found you, and I hope it passes away soon.
Oh, well, that's lovely. Thank you. How are you?
I'm okay, thank you. No cold, but I just got my flu shot.
Yes. Well, I got my flu shot, too. And I know they say the flu shot doesn't give you the flu, but the timing was oddly suspicious, so, you know.
Interesting. Oh,
Yes.
It made me really sick last year, but this year just a little bit of muscle soreness.
Yeah, I think it's conspiracy theories. Who's with us today, Rachel?
Today, we continue our tour of the Global Caucuses, and we are talking today to Bruce Murray and Sue Alksnis, the chair and vice chair of Democrats Abroad's Global Progressive Caucus. So welcome, Bruce and Sue.
Hello. Thanks for having us.
Thanks, David and Rachel. It's nice to be here.
It's great to have you. Before we plunge into the Progressive Caucus, what it's about and what you're doing, we have a couple of questions we like to ask our guests. The first being, what state do you vote out of? And the second being, where do you live now and what brought you there or keeps you there?
Well, I am voting in Connecticut, and I live just outside of Toronto in the suburbs on the west side of the city, which folks from the Toronto area will understand is important. It's very infrequent that a person switches from one end of the city to the other. You're either a West Ender or an East Ender.
Well, only Toronto people would find that important. You're right. Yeah.
Yeah, well, you know, we find little things to fight about.
But you are a confirmed West Ender.
Yes, by marriage.
All right. Yes. I guess that's the last question. What keeps you in the West End of Toronto?
Yep, that's it.
Yes. Can we pry? Did you get married before you came to Canada or after?
I did. Yes. While I was in university, I met a Canadian and married him. And then about 20 years ago, with two preschoolers, we moved up to Canada, and partly for family reasons, but we also really loved that healthcare was available here universally to everyone. And that there was the opportunity for public education in French. And that there was a lot less gun violence up here.
Mm-hmm.
No, I think this is a new one, though. So he was in the United States, and you followed him to Canada?
So he is a Canadian and came down to study. So we met at a U.S. university and then lived there for, I don't know, 10 years or so, and then eventually switched from Connecticut, which is the last place we lived, up here to the Toronto region.
Right.
I think David's right, though. Most of the people we've talked to recently, if they are Americans who married Canadians, they came here to Canada to school and met their spouses here. So you are another expression
version.
of another version. That's the word. Yes.
All right, well, I try to be interesting.
And let Bruce, you should have a turn to answer the same questions.
Sue and I have a lot in common. I voted in the state of Illinois in the land of Lincoln and grew up in Minnesota. And I left the United States in 1992 and came to Austria, Vienna, where I have been for the last 30 years for over half of my adult life. And I've been a professor for the University of Illinois in German studies, and I've directed the Illinois programs in Vienna for that entire time. What I mean about having something in common is that what Sue really likes about Canada, I also really like about Austria, the quality of life. It's been a great place to raise a child, and we don't regret it at all.
So is it love that keeps you there, or is it work that keeps you there?
Loving my work and working my love.
I feel like we better get her on the podcast and hear a little more about that.
So where is your spouse from Austria, or is your spouse American?
She's always says that she's a Hoosier from Fort Wayne, Indiana, and a healthcare professional who for about the last 2 years has been contact tracing up to 16 hours a day.
Wow. That's a big
Thank you to her.
Yes, indeed. Yeah. Well, we should talk about the Progressive Caucus.
Yes.
The reason we are convened today. So we'd like to know a little about how the caucus formed and what you're focusing on and how long each of you has been involved with it.
Well, I guess I'll jump in on how it got started. In the fateful year of 2016, there were a lot of people around the world who got pretty excited about the presidential candidacy of Senator Sanders, and I was one of them. Bruce, you were one of them too, right?
That is true.
And when we saw the outcome of the general election in 2016, there were a lot of people who had been supporters of his campaign, who were motivated to get more involved in Democratic Party activities internally and get involved in the party and look at the presidential primary process, how the party selects candidates, the superdelegates role. And I was one of those people. And so I ran for a position with Democrats Abroad Canada, and met up at the first global meeting of DA that I attended in the spring of 2017, met up with a number of people who felt it was time for a progressive caucus within Democrats Abroad. And over the following months, we put together terms of reference and started a steering committee and activities for the caucus.
So is it all Bernie Sanders people?
No. The idea was that it was open to, it's open to all members of Democrats Abroad. You don't have to support any particular candidates. It's really around ideas of wanting policies that serve the interests of everyday Americans, that get big money out of politics, that tries to fight against corruption in politics. There's a lot of folks who really care deeply about anti-militarism and anti-war movements. And a lot of folks in the caucus want to see progress happening more quickly than we might think the rest of the party is comfortable with, if that makes sense.
Yep.
Yeah, it does.
I'll jump in at this point and say that in one sense, we feel as though we represent all Democrats abroad, and we are really eager to recall that we do have working families and working class roots in the Democratic Party, and we want to push the envelope with many of the things, issues and the values that we all share, but sometimes forget a little bit. Also because right now it seems like there's so much work to do. We're trying as best we can to collaborate with other caucuses and to look for the issues that can be prioritized that need serious attention right now. And this week, for example, that means that we hope that we really, really can get to passing the Build Back Better Act.
Right. I want to come back to what you just said, but we should also give you a chance to tell us what led you into the Progressive Caucus and, in fact, the chair position.
My story is similar to Sue's. In 2016, going into 2017, in Democrats Abroad Austria, there was an annual general meeting with new elections, and there was a big turnover on the executive committee, and a lot of us came in motivated by progressive policies, and especially by the presidency we were hoping would end as soon as possible. So for the last 4 years, many of us in Democrats Abroad Austria were working on that. I, of course, as a German studies person, was the DA Austria Council, and we managed 2018 to win back the House. And at that time, I also was upping my ante. I had just retired and I went to the Midwest, wondering what happened in 2016 in some of those key states of Wisconsin, Michigan, Ohio, and Pennsylvania. And I rode my bicycle from Madison, Wisconsin to Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania to get out the vote. At that time, Sue and Gordon Gall, who were co-chairs at the time, helped put together a video for me that I used on the road to help people understand what we were doing. And then I volunteered at Democratic Party headquarters. And after I came back to Austria, I then began working more with Democrats abroad, the Global Progressive Caucus. And this year, having left my DPCA voting representative position and having cycled out of the council position in Democrats Abroad Austria, I decided that I wanted to focus more on making sure that the new Biden-Harris presidency was going to be as progressive, as big and bold as possible.
Interesting. Mm-hmm. The video that you mentioned, is there a place people can see that? Is it online still?
Oh, it's super short. It's just saying hi and wishing Bruce the best. Bruce, what was the name of your bike tour? Okay. What was it called?
It was the Midwest Midterm Progressive Bikeathon, an experience I will never, ever forget. 800 miles.
Wow.
The Progressive Bikeathon.
That's wonderful.
There's still a really great website associated with that has lots of images and a kind of blog and also a playlist that I really like.
Sounds like it was such fun. Good for you.
Bruce has introduced songs to start and sometimes end our meetings with the Progressive Caucus. And so we've put out a call to our members to please suggest songs. And it's just great to start with something to pump you up or something to calm you down or give you hope, help you carry on. It's really been a great new tradition that I love.
Can you name a couple you've used?
Yes,
just for fun.
Sue just did name one. Last monthly members meeting started off with Crosby, Stills, and Nash "Carrying On."
Mm-hmm.
With that
Lovely.
great harmony of that song.
So this is songs from all sorts of eras that people just may not have heard or need to be made aware of.
Anytime. And we're looking for suggestions. So, if there's anybody on the podcast who knows lots of songs by any chance,
there could be one or two.
We'd love some hairy suggestions.
All right, we'll see what we can do. But I want to come back. I want to come back to something Bruce said a little earlier. You're looking at pushing the envelope, you said, on the values and issues we share. And Sue named a whole list of values and issues that concern you. So what are you doing to push the envelope on those?
I'd like to take that one. And I've always said, I'll put a plug in, but I've learned that the modern way of saying it is I'm going to shout out for something. And we also have a Facebook page, and we have an issues advocacy team that is building right now. And the members of that team, each one selects one issue to follow. And then they post once weekly in our Facebook page. Right now, that means that Mondays are Voting Rights Day in Pro-DA Facebook. And on Tuesdays, we have Student Loan Justice featured. On Wednesday, we're collaborating also with Reparations Task Force and its leader, Antar Keith, and he posts each Wednesday. And out in Japan, Farid Ben-Amour, who just moved from Switzerland to Kyoto, is now posting once weekly on media and internet justice. And I am now just taking Fridays. In Austria, there's a big movement in Europe actually, called Fridays for Future. And it's a climate change mitigation movement of young people like the Sunrise Movement in the United States. And I've decided that I want to take Fridays to post on climate change mitigation and what kind of progress we're making and need to make there.
That's such a creative idea. Are you getting good response to those issues specific post days of the week. I don't even know what you call them.
The student loan justice posts are really really popular, and people are engaged heavily around that. I think I think that's an area where, I mean, a lot of people care deeply about that. They either are people, struggling with that debt, which you can never, it's not subject to bankruptcy. You owe that money forever, and the interest just keeps piling on.
We have 43 million people who are working on their student debt, and the amount of money right now is $1.8 trillion.
Wow. Yeah, I think a lot of people in whatever we would call the older generations aren't really, unless they have a child who's struggling with it, aren't really aware of how it changed from when they were in school, because it's become increasingly inhumane, I think, that whole system. It used to be a benefit, and now it's a weight around your neck.
Yep.
In my state of Illinois, Senator Durbin is pushing a bipartisan bill co-sponsored by the Texas Senator Cornyn on student debt relief, focusing on trying to make sure that young people who are shouldered with humongous student debt can, following the rules, after a certain period, similar to what people do everywhere, can file for bankruptcy. Mm-hmm. You can file for bankruptcy for all kinds of reasons, but not for student debt.
Right. Student debt's an interesting one, though, and I think you knew going into it you were borrowing this money.
Well, I think David, that the economy has changed a lot. Like the rules have changed, so folks saw themselves taking on this debt, and then jobs disappearing, co-pays increasing on healthcare, deductibles increasing, premiums increasing, jobs that didn't even that ended their health benefits. Like, the rug was pulled out from under them. I think folks talk about, there was kind of a social contract that was understood. You'd take out these loans and you'd be able to pay them back. The jobs would be there, and that's not the case.
Mm-hmm.
The Build Back Better bill got mentioned as well. I guess, Bruce, it's your turn. So explain the support for this.
Well, a lot of people like to say, and I do too, that it is the Biden-Harris agenda. And they came into office in January with 4 plans: the American Rescue Plan, the American Jobs Plan, the American Families Plan, and the Made in America Tax Plan. None of those 4 was a bill, but they have been transformed into legislation. And now the American Rescue Plan passed first via reconciliation, and the American Jobs Plan is in a watered down version, a part of the bipartisan infrastructure bill.
Yes.
And the American Families Plan, and a lot of what was taken out of the bipartisan infrastructure plan, they're now in the Build Back Better Act, which often is referred to as the social programs bill, but it also focuses a great deal on combating climate change. And it started out as a $3.5 trillion bill. Really important to emphasize that is over 10 years. And if you take it year for year, that would be $350 billion. And currently, we're spending roughly $750 billion a year on defense spending. That's a good context to keep in mind.
Well, and so I guess a follow-up question for you is the Build Back Better plan progressive enough?
Well, we have a variety of slogans in the Progressive Caucus, and I already mentioned one, pushing the envelope. And we believe that during the year 2021, there have been some things that have been left on the sidelines, and they constitute for us unfinished business. And we're getting ready to end 2021 with an event in December where it's in development right now, focusing on unfinished business of building back better, learning and building on our victories and learning from the setbacks of 2021. And we have a handful of things that we think are really important to focus on in 2022 that can meet the needs of many U.S. Americans who are not that juiced, I'll put it that way, about what has happened so far.
Right.
And they're considering their options in the midterms 2022.
Sue, what do you think?
Well, I just want to thank Bruce for mentioning the comparison between, the proposed spending under the Build Back Better Act and what we Americans tend to call defense spending, which I'm not sure how much of it is spent in actual defense. I would call it military or some other kind of spending. And I would also say that we're looking for, in addition to promoting the issues and policies that were left out of the Build Back Better Act through the negotiation process, we're also interested in advancing candidates who support those kinds of issues and policies going forward, so that everyday Americans have their own views and values more accurately reflected in their representation in Washington and in state houses.
You mentioned issues and policies left out of Build Back Better. Do you want to speak to some of those specifics?
I'd like to take...
Yeah, Bruce is good for that.
We've been in the caucus this year holding regular Biden-Harris progress reports, and it has been a very enlightening experience for me because all of us, I think, I'll certainly say it for myself, we're more or less aware of what's going on legislatively, but you can go into the weeds, you can go deeper into the weeds, and then you can get lost in news cycles and kind of forget.
Yes.
And with the American Rescue Plan, for example, there was a kind of dramatic push for raising the federal minimum wage to $15, and that did not work. So that's one item. And I'll just mention one other. With Medicare expansion, we started out the Biden-Harris plan with decreasing the age of eligibility to 60 from 65, with covering hearing, vision, and sight. And now it's down to only hearing. And
hearing, dental, and sight, you mean? You said hearing, vision, and sight. So it was to have covered three things, and now it's down to one. Oh, dear. Right. I didn't mean to interrupt your train of thought, though.
Thanks. I kind of sensed that something wasn't quite right there. Those are only two examples, and there are many more also in the climate mitigation realm, where just one more would be that there was a clean energy standard that was to be a part of the Build Back Better Act, which is, to state it simply, a measure trying to get us to phase out coal and transition faster to renewable energy, making big progress by 2030. And that has been left on the sidelines temporarily too.
Another one was free community college, which, keep in mind, while people are going to college, they still need some way to cover their living expenses. So it's still requires some capital to go to college, even for free.
Right.
It's true.
You both mentioned healthcare as the reason why you're living in the countries you're still living in. So, Sue, let me ask you this. When you look out around the world and see progressive ideas outside of the United States, what's an example for you that some country is doing really well, and you can't for the life of you fathom why the U.S. doesn't do it? And you can't say healthcare because you already said that.
Okay, well, I've got an easy one. Here in Canada, we have paid parental leave for a year at a percentage of your earnings, and then you go back to your job. And here in Canada, I suppose from time to time someone complains about it, but for the most part, it builds energy in our economy. I think, like, people can apply for these 1-year mat leave coverages, so they get this great experience. They get exposed to a new job or a new area of experience, and of course the children in our country are getting this start with a a parent at home with them for their first year. There's some income to the family to support that. And my heart breaks when I tell people here in Canada, in the States, a person can take 6 weeks off, and then they what they're promised is they can have their job back. Mm-hmm. Like it's not fair. And it's part of what increases the economic divide in the U.S., the wealth inequality that once you're struggling financially, you're going to struggle worse and worse and worse, right?
Right. Bruce, same question to you. What's a progressive policy when you look around the world that some countries doing and doing well, but not healthcare?
In Austria, I would say collective bargaining is very, very strong. It's alive and kicking. And each year, about this time in the fall, there are the metal workers, and then there are the retail workers and other groups of workers who negotiate for their salary collectively for the coming year. And the negotiations are short, and they work well. There's always some time when there might be 12 to 14 hours of continuous negotiations, but then it's over, and there's almost never a strike. And that means that investors who are looking for a secure place to invest their money, they prefer to come to a place like Austria, knowing that there isn't going to be that kind of labor controversy that could challenge a business thriving. And that kind of collective bargaining also plays out in with healthcare and family paid leave. And it seems as though the unions here are working well, and that they've never really experienced the kind of corruption that was a part of U.S. labor movements when I was a young person. So it just seems as though that works pretty well here in Austria and in several other Central European countries. And it's something that I think that we could do much better in the United States.
It's interesting that these are called progressive policies, because I think looking at the world stage, these are centrist. These are kind of standard things that developed countries have for their people. They're not progressive. They're just ordinary common sense kind of policies. And Bruce's point about industry, and investors feeling comfortable with the labor environment in Austria, or you could say, here in Canada, if I'm allowed to mention healthcare, employers know that they are not going to have to negotiate a lot on healthcare coverage or worry about that. We do have a system here for those outside Canada where there is some supplemental insurance needed. We don't have a toe to tip of the head kind of program here in Canada, but the bulk of necessary healthcare is covered. So in fact, some years ago, I understand American businesses operating in Canada were supportive of changes that would strengthen the national healthcare system.
Mm-hmm. Interesting.
So we're called the progressives in the American context, but outside of that, we're centrist, which calls into question what one would call some of the other parties and movements in the U.S.
Absolutely. Yeah. And what if you started calling these centrist policies?
Right.
So you mentioned an event in December. Are there other events and activities coming up that you want to mention?
We have a tentative event calendar for the next 6 months. And we're trying to collaborate more with our own Congressional Progressive Caucus and with the schedulers for elected officials in the United States. And we talked a while back about issues advocacy and issues that we're focusing on repeatedly. And almost all of those are on our schedule for upcoming events going into 2022. And there's another one that I would like to ask Sue to talk about. We don't have an event scheduled for it yet, but we have all kinds of ideas, a lot of percolation and collaboration with others in the DA world. And suit. I want to just say it and then you describe it. She came up with this great name called Pivotal Primary Project.
The PPP to go with the BBB.
Yeah,
Exactly.
the PP. Yeah. Or to take the place of the GPP off years.
Aha. So tell us.
The GPP for being the global presidential primary that DA runs every 4 years for Americans living overseas to help nominate the Democratic nominee for president. The idea of something like a pivotal primaries project would be that working with a coalition of folks in Democrats abroad, that we would identify primaries that are happening across the U.S. where there's an opportunity for a change or stronger candidate to come forward in a swing location. So there's a number of folks who are retiring from their, as senator or representative, and so it's kind of a open, fresh primary for the Democratic nominee for those positions. So those are the kinds of races where we're hoping that we can excite DA members and perhaps more. Well, I don't want to say more importantly, because we love our DA members. But what word can I use to push the envelope? Let us say we might be able to get some attention from folks who aren't yet engaged as voters from overseas. If they realize that there's a primary coming up that could determine who's going to be the representative. So there are some places that are solid blue districts, right? We know the Democratic nominee is going to win in the general election. So the deciding vote is really the vote in the primary, and not every voter or American understands that. So, some years ago when Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, for instance, won her primary, the night she won the primary, she and the world knew that she would be a representative in Congress because that's a solidly blue district. And yet not all of her constituents were aware that that was the night to decide who was going to go to Washington a few months later.
Right.
Wow.
David and Rachel, I want to playfully recruit you as team members just for a moment. We're reaching out to everybody in DA right now and saying, hey, this was the year when after the census results came in, that redistricting is going on all over the United States. And the maps in many states now are being settled even as we speak. And there are others that still need a little bit more work. And in many states, it's either the Democratically led legislature or the Republican-led legislature that does that work. Or in other states, it can be a nonpartisan group that is selected. And it's time for all of us in Democrats abroad to say, I'm not sure that my district is going to be exactly the district it was 2 years ago. Mm-hmm. Mine in Illinois is going to change pretty dramatically. So we're asking everyone to go to sites like 538 or to Ballotpedia just to, click around a little bit and learn what the heck is going on with my district so I can get ready for 2022.
That's a good idea.
Mm-hmm.
538 has a great map that Bruce shared with me and others, where you can see if your new congressional district map is set, or if it's proposed, and you can take a look at what the proposed new districts might look like. It's very interesting.
Good to know.
So there will be some new districts, and in those areas, the primary, obviously, for the Democrats, is going to be very important. It's fresh start in that district, and so we think could be exciting for Americans overseas to know about those.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely, yeah. This has been fascinating. I'm just wondering if there's anything that you haven't mentioned that you would like to.
We have a book and film club last Monday of every month at 12 noon Eastern time, and really great reading list for that, and we sometimes have the author participate. So
Nice.
Highly recommend that. And we're hoping to have a screening of a film that's part of the Student Loan Justice Project. Quite a few student loans come through a organization called Sally Mae, which we maybe Rachel and David, you guys think of that as a government agency as I do, but Sally Mae is not a government agency anymore. It's a for-profit business. And so the film is called Sally Mae Not. So we'd like to run a screening of that. It's screening at universities all across America. And anyone who's listening to the podcast, if they'd like to go to Student Loan Justice online, they can find out information about having a screening of that film or others in the series on their campus. So whether you're a student or an alum or a faculty member or know somebody at a school, that's happening right now. Those screenings are rolling out. There's at universities across the U.S. to raise awareness and build momentum for the movement for student loan justice. They have a petition that has over 1 million signatures on it. And in our Progressive Caucus, we're fortunate to have Heather Taylor as part of our team, and she's the international chapter lead for student loan justice.
Fabulous.
Yeah. Wow. Lots going on.
Yep.
We have time for just one more quick one.
Sure. Go for it.
This is going back to legislative stuff. And there's an H.R. 40 bill that is one that is dedicated to forming a reparations task force commission in the United States. And it is just 10 votes short, and it could come to a full House vote in December of this year.
Wow.
And our reparations task force people are working hard to support with 300 organizations. And there are people from all over the spectrum of reparations justice. If you think about it, it involves a wide spectrum of peoples in the United States. And that's something that is, I think, important to watch, and something that could happen in December, along with a New Jersey bill that has passed the Assembly. It's in the Senate, and it would give us the right in 17 states. When we re-register each year, we're asked, are you staying for a while? Are you coming back?
Yes, exactly.
Yes.
And that decides whether or not you get to vote in state and local elections in many states.
My return is uncertain. Yes, exactly.
Yeah. And, there's a team of people working really hard in the New Jersey state team to help pass that. Some people went to New Jersey to speak in favor of it this week. And if it passes there, it can become a model in 17 states where that is a problem. And it could be a big get out the vote victory for us Democrats abroad.
Wow.
Sure.
I guess I'll just throw in, I think we're running out of time, but one of the reasons why the reparations, the House bill for reparations commission is really important to the Progressive Caucus is that some of the remedies that might come out of the work of a commission like that could very easily be the agenda of the Congressional Progressive Caucus. There's a lot of different ways of having restorative justice for the systemic and structural racism that has hurt and killed so many people in America.
Mm-hmm.
And one approach or part of a solution is the kind of policies that level the playing field, give people a fair chance, and provide the kinds of services and supports and rights that you can see reflected in the agenda of the Congressional Progressive Caucus.
All right.
Interesting. Wow. Well, thank you both so much for joining us today. And keep on doing it.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Yeah. Oh, you know what? There is one thing I realized I wanted to share, that the membership of Democrats abroad aligns, generally speaking, very strongly with the policy objectives and perspective of of the Progressive Caucus and the Congressional Progressive Caucus based on our voter turnout for the last two global presidential primaries. So the Progressive Caucus, in a sense, part of our role is to represent DA externally so that Americans living abroad who don't understand how progressive DA tends to be can recognize, oh, there's a place for me when they see, oh, there's this thing called the Progressive Caucus. That must be the progressives.
It's really interesting. And it makes me want to ask whether you think that's related to the fact that DA's membership lives outside the U.S.
I would think it does. What do you think, Bruce?
When I answer questions like that, I always say there are many factors.
You sound like a politician.
Or a professor. Professor.
But what you just implied, I think, is certainly the case. And I think it is also entertaining to think about what Sue and I and what you might say about why you are where you are. And that's probably linked to some desire that we have been motivated to broaden our horizons and look to see where things are working well and to try to benefit from those for ourselves, but also for the people in our communities. Mm-hmm. And I think that's a reason why I imagine that you are hosting this podcast.
Well, that would be telling.
And Rachel never tells.
She just implies.
Sounds like a reasonable reputation to me. I'm Rachel Oigster with David Schellenberg in Ottawa, Canada. Thank you for listening to Democrats Abroad, the Blue Vote Cafe.